You know those childhood stories that sound like they're straight out of a movie? Well, this isn't some feel-good comedy. This is more like a thriller, a true story coming out of the western suburbs of Sydney back in the 1980s. It's all about friendship, a whole lot of pain, and just pure intensity. So let's get right into it. So let me introduce you to our guys, two best friends named Pudgy and Pickle. And what starts out as, just a classic childhood adventure is about to turn into what they'd later call the prologue to a war. This is their story, and it's all set on the suburban battlefields where they grew up. You have to understand, back in 1980s Western Sydney, football wasn't just a game. No, it was the absolute lifeblood of the community. It was celebrated with this religious dedication. I mean, you'd see flags flying from every single house, and the entire neighborhood would cram around one TV, just screaming for their team until they lost their voices. So, naturally, when you're 12 years old, there was really only one path you could take. You had to join the local team, the Warriors. And for Podgy and Pickle, this was it. This was their big initiation into manhood. It was their one chance to finally make their fathers proud, to step out onto that sacred field and prove what they were made of. And they had this huge fantasy, right? A dream of rising above the poverty and the neglect they saw around them. They dreamt of being seen as real athletes, strong, attractive, proud, standing on a field with thousands of people screaming their names, chanting for glory. This was going to be their ticket out. And man, did they commit. I mean, they were all in. They worked odd jobs just to afford their uniforms, saved up every penny for the best boots and gear, and they trained relentlessly, night after night. They'd copy the moves of the legends they saw on TV, playing for hours in their front yards, until they were absolutely convinced they were becoming legends themselves. They really thought they had it all figured out. And then, finally, the day arrives. Game day. The whole team's in the locker room, just buzzing with this crazy energy, completely convinced they were about to walk out there and, well, in their words, kick some ass. The air was just electric. But right in the middle of all that hype, the first crack in the armor appears. A wave of just pure white panic washes over Podgy's face. He turns to Pickle, his voice all tight with worry, and he says those fateful words, "Oh no, I forgot my mouth guard." But nobody seemed to care. His concern was just waved away. Pickle, his best friend, just kind of brushed it off. And the coach? His eyes were filled with the fear of losing his first game. He didn't even bother to turn around. He just tossed over his shoulder, "You'll be right, mate." And just like that, dismissed probably the single most important piece of safety gear, all for the hope of a win. So after some pep talk that honestly nobody even remembers, the team just bursts out of the locker room. They're sprinting towards a field and their eyes are struggling to adjust to that blinding Australian sun. But as the glare starts to fade, their vision focuses on something they could never, ever have prepared for. And as their eyes adjust in one single moment, the entire team's confidence just evaporates. They freeze, right there on the spot, jaws on the floor, at the sight of their opposition. There was just one collective thought that rippled through the whole team, a kind of shared, terrified whisper. Holy shit. Because standing in front of them wasn't a team of 12-year-old boys. It looked like a solid wall of fully grown men. There was just no way these guys were 12. They were, in Podgy's own words, fucking enormous. Their shorts were stretched so tight around legs that looked like tree trunks. They called themselves the Fobs. And to these kids, they looked like warriors plucked straight out of a nightmare. An entire team of giants he'd only ever seen in books. He glances over at Pickle and sees that same raw fear mirrored in his eyes. But there was something else there too, a shared understanding. There was no backing down now. They couldn't run. They had to see this through. They had to go on. From the very first whistle, it was a massacre. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. That dream of glory just instantly evaporated into a brutal, painful, horrifying reality. Podgy gets the ball for the first time. And he's excited, right? He dodges, he weaves, he's gaining speed, gaining confidence, and then, boom, he runs full speed into a wall. Not just one, but two of these enormous players closing in on him. A wall of human concrete. The impact knocked his front teeth clean out. It fractured his skull in two places, once from the hit itself, and then a second time as his head slammed into the hard ground. The air was ripped out of his lungs, and as darkness just closed in around him, he slipped into a coma-like state right there on the sideline. And the response? What happened next? No ambulance was called, no parents were contacted. Just the coach screaming over the injured bodies of his own players to the referees. Play on. Seeing his best friend taken out like that, something just snapped inside Pickle. He went on an absolute rampage. He started dodging the big guys, weaving through these moving statues of men, and he just started scoring tries, one after another, fueled by this raw need to avenge his friend. But the other team noticed. After a tackle, one of their players offered Pickle a hand up. A gesture of sportsmanship. But it was all a trick. The moment Pickle took his hand and was pulled to his feet, the player used that leverage to swing a devastating punch. A humongous black fist appeared, and for Pickle, everything just went black. And just like that, the violent chaos of the football field gives way to the sterile, dead quiet of a hospital. The game is over, but the real consequences are only just beginning. And that's where the two friends are reunited, in the children's ward at Westmead Hospital. They're completely battered, toothless, and broken, sitting side by side in wheelchairs, covered in bandages. They have broken bones, fractured skulls, and, of course, completely shattered egos. And it was there, in the quiet of that hospital room, that they made a pact. They retired. They swore to each other they would never play another game of football. Not on grass, not on concrete, ever again. The dream was officially dead. So what happens next? What comes after a childhood dream dies so violently? Well, for Podgy and Pickle, the answer showed up a few months later, when they discovered an entirely new hobby: rollerblading. And why? What was the new grand ambition that took the place of football glory? It's simple, really. They did it mainly just to impress girls. A brutal, bloody initiation had come to an end, but their story, as you can probably guess, was still very, very far from over.